Welcome to In This Body, a podcast where we dive deep into the potent power of embodiment. I'm your host, Ailey Jolie, a psychotherapist deeply passionate about living life fully from the wisdom within your very own body. The podcast In This Body is a love letter to embodiment, a podcast dedicated to asking important questions like, how does connecting to your body change your life? How does connecting to your body enhance your capacity to love more deeply and live more authentically? And how can collective embodiment alter the course of our shared world? Join me for consciously curated conversations with leading experts. Each episode is intended to support you in reconnecting to your very own body. This podcast will be available for free wherever you get your podcasts, making it easy for you to stay connected to In This Body, the podcast with me, Ailey Jolie. Welcome to today's episode of In This Body. I'm honored to have Ailey and Cara with us today. Ailey is the clinical director of Wise Body Counseling, a registered clinical counselor with a master's in counseling psychology and an expert in embodiment, somatic dream work, and psilocybin therapy. She is also in the process of certifying as a sex therapist with the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, a training I have done myself. Ailey has a diverse and integrative approach to therapy, specializing in issues rooted in childhood emotional neglect, self-abandonment, and setbacks in sexual self-esteem. She seamlessly weighs traditional psychological theories with modern somatic and experiential practices, including mindfulness, focusing-oriented therapy, and dream work. Her passion for women's sexuality, depth psychotherapy, and embodied spirituality is evident in her work, both in her private practice and through her contributions to TherapSil, where she provides psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy here in Canada. Ailey's journey is multifaceted and was driven by her commitment to help individuals reconnect with their very own bodies, heal from trauma, and explore their inner wisdom. I connected with Ailey as we both completed our training in focusing-oriented therapy together. It was here that we connected over somatics, dream work, and really supporting femme individuals to inhabit their very own bodies. Ailey is dedicated to creating transformational spaces that honor her clients' deeper intuitive voices, helping them to live from a deeper sense of who they truly are. Ailey, I am thrilled to have you with us here today. Welcome to In This Body, the podcast with me, Ailey Jolie. My first question for you, Ailey, is I would love to hear what originally drew you to the realm of somatic therapy and embodiment. We both went through similar master's programs at the same university, and I can't speak for your experience, but I can speak to mine. Somatics was not a part of my master's degree. There wasn't any conversation on embodiment as a clinician or how to support your clients become more embodied. So I would love to hear from you, like, what led you into these two areas, somatics and embodiment, and acknowledging and honoring that they aren't usually part of a traditional education for a therapist?
Yeah, so true. Yeah, I had the same experience at Adler. I had one teacher that I did follow along who was very embodied herself. So I did kind of get that feeling of how to do the work in a way that I would say was quite deep in that sense. But I didn't learn a lot about the areas that now are really becoming, it seems like a lot of clients who call in, it's becoming quite like up to the surface for people, somatic experiencing and hakomi and things like that people are like calling in now for. So it's been an interesting journey because I would say they felt like two different worlds for me at first. So when I started at Adler, I had done an Ashtanga yoga teacher training, and I had even done some yoga teaching in my teens, because my mom was quite connected to the Salt Spring Center of Yoga. So, in that sense, embodiment for me in that way of, kind of somatic releasing and kind of, yeah, being more using your body as an ally and being in connection with it as part of healing was already quite comfortable for me. And that was quite like known for me. But you're absolutely right. When I took many courses in Adler that were more maybe philosophical and theoretical, it felt like a different space. So I think I did my own work in a way to try and start to bridge that straight off the bat, and it took some time to really find, I guess, a groove with where I could bridge those for myself and in my work.
And you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that the person you are referencing from Adler is Anna Mazel,
Yes.
who I have worked with and really appreciate and admire what she puts forward. And why I bring her kind of into this conversation is because so much of embodiment and how people find themselves on that path comes from being in the presence of someone who is deeply in their body. Was there anyone else on your journey that you saw? You're like they seem to have something or a little zhuzh that I want more of, that made you curious about, somatic processing for yourself or coming deeper into connection with your own body?
Well, when it came to the therapy realm, I would say that I didn't, in the school itself, I didn't see much of that. I think Anna was quite unique in her way of being and, yeah, being in her being. But at that time, I did write my thesis on mindfulness and my own practice of meditation. So I did begin to connect with different people around Vancouver who were maybe more so on the side of being meditation teachers or teaching mindfulness based stress reduction. So once I started to meet those, mostly women that I can think of right now, they started to open up that realm for me, which was another sort of a complement to the talk therapy world, I'd say.
What challenges have you experienced in trying to merge that talk therapy, maybe more of that traditional training that comes with a master's, with some of the somatic work? Are there places where that's been sticky for you to integrate those two things together?
That's a good question. I think at first, I will say when I wrote my thesis on mindfulness, a lot of people in my program were not there yet. So people were really challenging of me saying,
Mm.
yeah, they were sort of saying, oh, you're going to like there were different sentiments, but the gist of it was they almost felt you're bringing something in that is your agenda and that's different from where clients are at. And I knew that it couldn't be that it didn't work for people or that they weren't that no one was open to it. I knew it couldn't be that, but it has been a journey. I'd say primarily because people who are in the beginning of my work, I worked more in addictions and eating disorders and a chronic pain clinic. So I found when people are in even a crisis state or feeling more, yeah, like disembodied, it's really challenging to sometimes, yeah, like introduce that offering that is about opening to that pain.
When you have someone that is in that pain and they're like a little hesitant to go into it, as I can think of moments in my life when I was in crisis and I was like, absolutely not, we're not going
Yeah.
there. You even experienced that. I was in crisis. We went to a women's retreat together and they kept inviting me to be in my body. And I was just like, hell no, like it's not happening. Not at all.
Yeah.
Um, how you work with a client who's maybe not as extreme as me, who decides to go to a women's retreat when they're in crisis and can't connect to their body is a whole other question, but maybe subtler degrees of that. How do you support someone who is maybe like legitimately, it is quite challenging to be in the body, maybe not even the most appropriate? How do you kind of support that, acknowledging that there is so much wisdom inside the body?
Yeah. Well, that's a great point. I mean, it's such a good question because I think it takes many years of usually from what I've seen, takes usually many years working in the field of therapy to really kind of like yeah, like I guess sharpen your tools in that way of being able to discern what might be needed because sometimes clients think they need one thing and being person centered for me isn't just about meeting them what in the place where they're telling me what they think they need, but I'm also, assessing that simultaneously. So I've experienced both. I've experienced clients who come in and the first session they're saying, I've heard about somatic experiencing. I want to see how you do focusing. And it's like, oh, okay, well, that's an interesting way to start this because I normally wouldn't dive right into focusing or view it in a way that it is like a tool. It's more so that I'm seeing that, like, because I believe that the therapy deepens as the trust deepens between us. So when I'm seeing it in such a relational way and I'm seeing focusing as something that I can offer, and it's even a map in many ways in how I view what might be needed. But as far as like our doing what we do in the session, that feels like it just feels like it's kind of like a product of our doing culture. Like it's all about like, what can I gain next? What can I achieve? What can I, put on my resume or whatever it is? And therapy's not like that. It's such a delicate, sometimes like opening and, peeling away of things and naming of things and yeah, kind of like a letting go, but you can't force it. You can't like, you can't yeah, sort of like move someone along. There's that saying in the somatic world of moving at the pace of safety.
Mm.
So yeah, so I think if someone came to me and they're saying, I want to get here and I want to know how you work and da, 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 and I'm like, oh, okay. I'm like, I have to like explain a little bit and just share a little bit about how I then see it because I think that um when you work in a more subtle way, you it does kind of require a certain amount of openness on the other person's part, but it doesn't mean that everything has to be somatic and has to be about release and has to be about, I don't work in that way where it's like, okay, we're gunning for this as a goal. It's much more for me that I'm kind of observing the place that they're coming in from. So for that person, they actually, to me, it felt unsafe to go into the body. I could just tell that there was like the protectors kind of there. And so even though they're telling me that they want me to guide them in, I suggested in that case, like, you know what? I think today perhaps we could just see that this is a chance for us to get a sense of each other. And
Mm.
maybe, yeah, in that sense, we can move at a pace where you're able to keep checking to see, like, where is my trust at with Angela today?
I love one thing that you said in specific was moving at the pace of safety. So much of, at least what I witness in some of the somatic world, not everywhere, are these pockets of really intense cathartic
Yeah.
release, or like you
Yeah.
to like really go into the trauma and like do the things. And I can only speak to my personal experience. I definitely fell into that kind of rhetoric and narrative in my own healing journey. And all it really created was more chaos in
Yeah.
my life. I can say that.
Yeah.
So I would love to hear for you how you kind of, if you do at all, incorporate some of those more cathartic based somatic
Mhm.
processing techniques that are often seen more in the psychospiritual realm or women's work realm with what you are describing, which is, a very subtle approach to psychotherapy. And I'll give a little side bracket just for the listener. Me and Angela are both trained in focusing oriented therapy by Eugene Gendlin. And that is a very soft entry using, closed eyes, focusing inwards, using imagery and visualization as a way of processing, which is very subtle
Yeah.
and a lot different than the cathartic experience that sometimes, somatics is defined to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I would say I come from the angle where I'm thinking, well, effective therapy is going to be it's hopefully going to move towards my like diminished levels of fear for people, right? You're hoping that where you're going is that the people start to uh, go to places that can be more. It's not always the biggest thing that the person thinks it is. So they sometimes think, okay, I need to, let's say it's a relational issue. okay, let's say like a couple might even come in. Sometimes I work with couples, and I've been working more and more with sex therapy and so sex issues in therapy. And so clients can come in and they might, I find today, if people are, let's say they're a couple who actually had satisfying or rewarding sex at some point, and now they're in this level of like, there's something new, which is like some block or some sense of disconnect between them. Like they might be saying, like, yeah, we're not uh like, I mean, the way they often word it might be like, this person, they don't have as much libido. It's often like pointing it at one person, their libido is apparently gone now. And I like to move so slow with even my assessment of what the actual issue is on that, because I think if people go into, let's say they go into, and there's lots of wonderful coaches out there, but let's say they go into a coach who maybe hasn't spent the time to really understand these ways that they impact people, they could they could go right for the concept that, let's say it's a heterosexual couple, they could be like, she needs to receive more and he needs to, I've just heard so many stories of this. He needs to be more strong in his penetration. And it's like, it's really interesting to see how often this advice, it's kind of like the David Data stuff from, I think from like the 80s, like these ideas are sort of outdated in the way that we've come so far in terms of, I think, looking more deeply at everything we associate with gender and what we as a society, project as often like shoulds onto men and women. It's like we're through some of that, or we're in the midst of it, but we're still in issues that people are actually going into that are really like tender. We're still going, here's the prescription. And I'm just so surprised to continue to hear that because in therapy, and again, it makes sense because it takes time to really get your head around what is healing and what is like forward movement. But I would say the more we get away from that rampant kind of like doing bias, where it's like, okay, so she needs to do this and try that, and all the tools and the tricks and the da da da, the more we can start to kind of reorient to looking inside. And I find that on the inside, people can start to become more aware of where they're shutting down and why. And it's actually really vulnerable work. It ends up being, yeah, just like any therapy, it ends up often going back to early messages we've received and the ways that our personality, I think one other piece is that I think we, in the somatic, the funny thing about this back and forth, I tend to pendulate between, spaces and like, I guess trainings that will be more somatic in nature. And then I love going back to the depth side and, learning about Jung and Freud's views. And I think it's funny because in many ways, like Freud was sort of like the baby thrown out with the bathwater in North America anyways, because I hear so much misunderstandings about some of those pieces. Of course, there are pieces that we need to be critical of and ongoingly, adjust our language and our perception. But even while we do that, we can go, oh, wait a second. He was actually bringing up a really interesting point, which was that our personalities are so shaped by those early experiences. And yeah, he was calling in that child development piece, which I think we're still integrating in many ways.
In much of his work, one thing that I have noticed is that he calls in for the corrective experience,
Yeah,
which is quite oppositional to the
yeah,
cathartic experience. So the
yeah,
cathartic experience is where you go into the emotion even more and you
yeah,
embody it, you just like fully let it out. And there
yeah,
is like a time and space for
yeah,
that.
yeah,
But if that is your consistent practice and
yeah,
your only practice, all you're doing is like strengthening that activation pattern
yeah,
in the body, and you're not
yeah,
actually getting some of the stuff that you're kind of speaking to here around the depth and the softness and challenging our experiences when you were younger,
yeah,
and actually moving into a place of no longer doing,
yeah,
but just being with what is here in this moment.
yeah.
I would love if you could just say more about how you guide people kind of back into their body. You've named like the doing, and I was like smirking because if you look at my CV, I have a strong doer. It's like I do all the meditation, like
Yeah.
I do all the trainings, but it's like being with
Absolutely.
myself, not
Yeah.
you
I
know,
get
I don't.
that.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious. So
Yeah.
there are other ways that you support people in coming back into themselves and moving out of that place of doing and moving away from maybe some of that more cathartic release-based work if they are more prone to it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think these are really, really good questions. I think they're important because, we have the approach of, yeah, I mean, we have in therapy more and more understanding that's working its way, I think, into most, whatever theory you choose. We are all, I think we're all coming to agree that there's a natural pendulation between sort of like sensing something that doesn't feel so okay, or maybe sensing, maybe putting a toe into something that feels like terrifying again, that basically the unprocessed stuff, and then back into the safe zone. And some theories just do it more, like some modalities do it more in a very structured way and very, okay, there's steps to this that we're going to follow. And other theories, they tend to be more subtle in that way, which is nice because something like focusing allows the person to really be the one in the driver's seat. So I love getting to that space with people. You asked like some examples, and every client is so different. So I do try to take in what they say about what they're wanting from therapy. And then I also take in their personality and the way that I can sense that they navigate things and experience. And then I also am going, okay, if they're open to it, I'm going to keep bringing in this opportunity to drop in. So for someone who's very like, some people have very strong minds, and I can really relate to that myself. And so it's been really powerful to recognize that, okay, on one level, I'm going to just keep inviting the awareness of the present moment. There's no big agenda I need to have. Sometimes people feel great after a session where they've like shared a whole bunch of stuff, and they've like really like gotten into this like story of what's happened since we last saw each other or whatnot. And that can be really it can be really helpful, that cognitive side of things, where it actually helps people to kind of yeah, like restory their narrative and start to kind of like bring in new possibilities. And then simultaneously, though, I'm just holding the awareness of potential for when we can maybe use some abiding presence. And I try to just bring that in whether I'm being directive or not. And it's like we can sometimes I can offer kind of reflections that actually help it to slow down and help it to ease more into what's happening here in the whole being and body. And so, yeah, I don't take a really, so something like somatic experiencing might take more of a stance of let's do this practice and really bring that in. For me, I don't, I sometimes do, but more often than not, I'll bring in the kind of opportunity, but I won't see it as this yeah, major shift in like what we're doing. I'll see if I can just bring it in around the edge and just kind of say like, "Oh, okay, what happened there when you were feeling that?" And you touched your heart, like, could we go back there, and just bringing it in a very just like respectful way of, not that they're doing anything wrong, not that they're being, kind of, I guess, surveilled or something, because some people get anxious when start to mention something that's happening that you might see in the body. So, yeah, I aim to just invite and just navigate things in a way where, okay, can we bring some more consciousness here? Let's see if we can expand together. Yeah.
I'm assuming, but I could be incorrect. Is this how you weave dream work into your practice? Because I know that that is something you absolutely adore.
Yeah.
I would love to hear more about how you weave that into how you support the clients you work with.
I do. I do love dream work. I've always like recorded my dreams, and I've always been just interested in any. I remember when I was a kid, I would look up the dreams in like a symbol book, and that was really neat. But yeah, like you said, what I do now is I see it more as such a, we also had Leslie on the show. Leslie Ellis has been a teacher of mine as well, and a friend, I'd say. And I would say that what I recognized in when I started to learn about focusing and about, I think 2009 or 2010, was that I started to learn that there's a way to work with them that is so honoring of them as a living process. And that is very cool because then you can really like surprise people. Sometimes they think that we're going to talk about them, and then, we might, but it's like once they've shared the dream, it's kind of like instead of like forcing anything, you can just kind of go, okay, let's see, is there a part that you're most curious about or interested in? And if someone doesn't bring dreams, by the way, because some people say I don't dream. That's like a common thing when I ask them. I always ask about dreams in the intake. So some will say I don't dream. I'll say, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. Just see, you might want to put a journal, like maybe buy a journal and put it beside the bed, and just put a pen there and just put a journal there, and just as you're falling asleep, just say to yourself that when you wake up, you will write it down. And so I just kind of suggest it to people as an idea, and some really do. Some really start rolling with it right away. And I think it's so powerful because it can really help us to get underneath the parts that it can it can help you to like it directs you toward areas that might not be even the most loudest part of what you see as the issue in your story right now, but sometimes there are these pieces that if we can maintain openness and curiosity, they can actually really uh surprise the client, because it can be about something that, again, might seem, when you think about the themes and therapy that we often talk about, it's like, okay, this doesn't seem maybe like trauma. Thinking of trauma as like overwhelm, it's like, okay, this might be something that they didn't even realize. They wouldn't say that it was an overwhelming thing, but they might kind of peel back a layer of the onion around who they thought they were. So it can be even an insight, that often dreams are multi-layered, but sometimes people will have an insight where they're like, "Oh, I thought I was so extroverted, but wait a second, maybe I'm shy sometimes." And yeah, I think that's so cool about therapy. It's not just about the yeah, the deep dive into like, you know, going back to the hardest times in your childhood. Sometimes things connect back to that, absolutely, and there's a skill in being able to direct that when it feels necessary. But there's also like, yeah, a lot of learning and growth that can just happen through dream work, that is very natural.
That's one thing that I have really, I think, learned to appreciate more is just the subtle currents of things and spending time with you, that it doesn't always go back to the heart of all of
Mm.
my childhood trauma.
Yeah.
Sometimes it does, but sometimes it's just little imprints of things that got left over from an interaction that didn't feel so good, or a
Mm.
glance I got on the street, and that is still kind of in my body and moving around. And until it's acknowledged, I don't really use the language of release anymore. I use more of the
Mm.
language of integrate until it's like integrated and acknowledged. That's kind of permeate and change how I show up.
Yeah.
Because you have like started to speak about it, I would love to hear a little bit more from you around how you perceive, dream work and embodiment. I view them as like deeply connected. But I would love to hear it from you and what your thoughts are and what the links are you see between those two concepts.
Oh, absolutely. I also view them as so interconnected. Yeah, again, I guess there was a time where I could see, I think I was into lucid dreams when I was in high school, and I remember getting so excited about that and trying the techniques, and and yeah, like you were saying, for catharsis, I agree that there's a time and place for everything. And then sometimes things become more subtle and more deeply rooted in self-discovery in a way, and that's what I feel like has happened for my dream journey in life. I would totally agree that, to me, they, because they're happening in the body, it's like there's it's very rare that they don't have, because I hear people sometimes saying, "Yeah, I dreamed about this person and then this happened." And I'm like, "Yeah, okay, maybe there's something." Yeah, I'm a big believer in synchronicity, absolutely. But the more interesting part to me generally is about, bringing it, like holding it inside where it's already come from. And it's in a way, it's kind of like, okay, can we sort of turn into that feeling or that image, and see what's there now, because even if it's the same day or it could be a totally different day, there's usually like still a sense of the aliveness of the dream. So if we can stay with that, to me, the whole gift in it, it's as much as we can often gain endless insights by exploring every corner of it. To me, like the gift of it is really when we are able to sense it to that place where something new comes into our awareness. It's like something we already know on some level, but then we integrate it to the place that we maybe come forward with a new piece of clarity about ourselves. So yeah, I absolutely love working with dreams, as you said, and to me, working with them in an embodied way, just it's to me, that's actually the place where the magic happens.
You spoke of that sensing in, which in my mind I hear and interpret as like it's a deep experience of listening, but also a really like embodied practice to be able to, I'm going to stay out with this sensation long enough for it to reveal just a little bit more insight or information or clarity, regardless of what that is and what my ego or mind or heart may have hoped that becomes.
Yeah.
I would love to hear about how you tie that like process into the work you do with sexuality, because I do know you. I know that you spent time in Tantra spaces. You've worked with a lot of really incredible teachers. You've like explored that spectrum. How you bring that into
Mhm.
the space of sexuality when oftentimes the narrative there is more of that cathartic, like
Yeah.
being that archetypal thing, like be in that gender role, really intense masculine, feminine polarities language. It's not always so subtle. And
Yeah.
what you described is, at least for me, a very subtle, slow, intimate process.
Absolutely. I think that's so the key word there, intimate, because it's this intimacy with yourself. You start to kind of find that, oh, this isn't a skill to develop, it's a capacity to
Mm.
develop. And yeah, that shifts how you relate to really anything in your life. So to give an example, like I can give a personal example. We're talking here about Greece and the women's work, and it's neat because I have had these really, beautiful, powerful experiences with circles of women. Even this weekend, I was at a wedding, I mean, a baby blessing that was just so, so beautiful, a circle of 25 women. And yeah, there is so much magic in that. And it's like, I think the magic part is the part where we hold each other. It comes back to me, it comes back to the relational pieces that, we would have in tribal culture would have just been a part of the culture, to really see one another and to really be able to be in whatever we're experiencing in order to really remember who we are. So to me, to give an example of maybe like an example with a dream that could be seen to relate to sexuality, and then there's always so many layers to dreams. But I'm thinking of how after Greece, I had a dream of this very, yeah, kind of Aphrodite energy. This woman who was like painting she had these big canvases and she was just painting in this cabin, I would say like a wood cabin. And she was just so free. She, had some red wine and she was just like, yeah, just like very Aphrodite. And then in the next part of the dream, there was this woman who was actually, I think it was her sister. And actually these are women from the retreat. But it was her sister who was actually on the ground. She realized, oh my God, she's dead. And she was all sliced. She had these very specific slices, almost like a box cutter. And for people who, I know you know this already, but for people who are newer to dream work, sometimes we get scared when we have a part of a dream that feels very violent. It's like, oh God, what is this about? Like, have I been cut up in all these ways? Like, your mind can really go into a dark place. Um, but what was so interesting when I worked it through, and this was, I think, a year ago, but I'm sure I can look at this dream again. Probably I will after just bringing it up. But what I looked at that point was I looked really deeply at the tendency that we kind of have to idealize, this state of. I think I look sometimes at women who are doing the women's work, and I just go, oh, she's I might have kind of pedestalized her in the past, going like, "Oh, she's so uh, mindful and so graceful." It's almost like we can idealize things that we think are not us, and that goes just as much for all of the areas that we're speaking about here in spirituality as it does for, even maybe in other realms. It could be more. Perhaps it's more superficial, but either way, it creates the same um envy almost in yourself. And so I was going deep into that. I was like, okay, do I feel like I'm not open enough? And going deep on that, it made me laugh because I realized I already live in a lot of creativity, and I I feel there's ways that I could do that more, but what I recognized from the dream, I ended up realizing that cutter, like the idea did kind of come to me as sort of like a box cutter. I was like, she needs that in her hand so she can be more discerning in life to kind of like, cut out the things that are not working and go like, oh, not that, and to be really discerning and really intentional about the spaces and the containers that she is creating in order to be in that open free space, and that inner freedom. There's always more layers that we can access of like love and freedom, but I felt like in order to access that I needed to get even more clear about the containers that I'm in, and the relationships that I hold. And so it ended up holding a very different like sense of it than when I first woke up from it. I was like, what's that? And I was kind of almost like reeling. But then I started thinking about these just different kind of like archetypal feminine energies. And yeah, I think for me, I was very much, when I think of like my grandmothers and the women in my life, in many ways, they were more on the nurturing side. So maybe didn't tune up the discernment as much. And when I started to do that this year, even more so than even to the point that it feels cutting to do it. It's like, it's hard to do because it feels cutting. But when I do it, it also feels really liberating because you can find more pleasure when you actually, yeah, cut away things that are too complicated or just old patterns. It's almost like I got sick of some old things that weren't even being messy. I was like, I'm just sick of being messy. I'm just like, just gonna step out of that pattern now. Like that's, I'm done with that. I'm gonna work a little harder at. In the moment for me, it was hard at first to be, yeah, more intentional, but it wasn't. It built up, and it started, and it's like, okay, started to build on itself, and now things in my life tend to feel more clear and grounded.
Can you speak to, because you are referencing both dream work, but you're also referencing women's work. And I know that you, yes, hold the space as a therapist, but that you also do women's work and offer that. Could you speak about how women's work is A, different than therapy, because it's a different thing,
Yeah.
and two, how it can be a really beautiful adjunct
Yeah.
to the therapeutic process?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think that so I learned from Jelija Bonheim some really big lessons in life. She said to me one time, I was sitting with her in New York. She lives just outside of New York, and she holds, well, at the time she was holding women's work trainings. And I went to her training, and she was going around the circle, people were sharing, and when it came to me, I was so caught up in what everyone else had said. I was just so honest. We were all kind of in such an authentic space too that I just honestly said to her, I don't know what to say. And she said, oh, what, say like what's coming up? What do you mean? And I said, well, that person just shared so deeply and so much emotion that like what would I say now? And she's like, oh, are you having a hard time resting in yourself? And just that line when she said it, I was like, "Oh my God." Like, I laughed because I was like, years of therapy have been trying to get at that. It seems so simple, it seems so obvious, but it really helped me understand that, oh, okay, when I'm around other people, I can, like, especially when things are more on the cathartic side, which at moments they were in that training, it's like I can very easily lose myself and lose my center, and to come back to the center, like at my core, um ends up being it's really my only practice.
Mm. Is that how you view women's work as being maybe somewhat of an adjunct? It
Yeah,
has more of that kind of embodied,
yeah,
I would say like embodied practice component, and also that deep sense of community that can
yeah,
kind of hold you in
yeah,
things in a deeper way.
yeah, exactly, because I find, like, with therapy, what's so profound is you can do some really deep healing around the relational wounds, like, when I think of moments where you go a little deeper into something that you had wanted to receive from an early caregiver, for example. And I find one-on-one therapy is so beautiful for that, for having that sense of like, oh, this person is like really not judging me, or they're willing to meet me, and it just really surprised me because I didn't expect to be held in that part of me. But I find with the women's work, it's so profound because it's like that break between like the community that we once had and would have had in most of the times that probably are the many hundreds of years that our brains were developing. And then now being in a space where we almost can't even conceive of it. Some women come into women's work and they're like, oh, even at the women's work this weekend, a couple of women said, oh, wow, I'm almost nervous here because there's so much love. I don't know how to receive it. And that was so cool because it's a different kind of corrective experience. It's not necessarily, yeah, the thing that you needed from your parent. It can often be the thing that you needed from, yeah, like what are now peers. And maybe at that time would have been, yeah, like our friendships or siblings.
Totally. I remember there's two moments that I remember from the last women's retreat we went on that have stayed with me in essence of speaking about that corrective experience. Was one being there in like a complete mess, not in a good place, total crisis, dealing with lawyers, like
Yeah.
phone calls and emails and like stressing over finances. Like, whoosh, it was like not fun for me to be there.
Yeah.
But in doing that, I challenge this pattern that I have to be alone and
Yeah.
that I'm only okay to show up when I have everything checked off and organized and like put in a little box.
Yeah.
And it was so, I mean, you experienced it. Like I would come out of the retreat and just like run away in my little room because I was like, I'm just like, like I need to deal with this before I can go engage with people. One corrective experience that really stands out. And the second one was an embodied practice that we did, and we were dancing. And I can't remember, she was a woman in her 60s, and she like grabbed my hands and she just like spun me around the room as everyone was dancing. And I just had this like deeply somatic moment where I was like, this is what all of life feels like. Like you're just like being spun around and there's people
Mm.
holding your hands and none of it makes any sense. And then one day it's going to stop and it's going to be okay. And I just like broke down into tears. And it's
Mm.
still a moment when I feel overwhelmed that I remind myself, I'm just like, there's something holding me, there's something
Yeah.
holding my hands right now, even though nothing around me makes sense.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm spinning and it's all going to fall apart. Like one day it will all stop and it will all be okay.
Yeah.
Like, and just enjoy the spin. And that is something you can get in therapy.
No, I love that example. I love that. You even reminded me of where I was thinking to go, and then I kind of forgot, was to say that it's not just the corrective experience of like, community of yeah, friends and maybe like sibling th or family, maybe cousins and things, of like feeling all that energy of community, but also like you're being held by the earth and
Yeah.
something like greater than yourself. And a lot of times in between the dance or things like that, people lay out in the trees or lay in the grass and just like let themselves be held. So I love that example.
I would love to hear from you. Kind of what are your go-tos to support someone in coming home to their body. And feel free to reference some of the women's work stuff that I know that you facilitate or some of the psychotherapy. But are there some go tos that you have when someone's wanting to increase the relationship they have to their very own body?
Mm, I like that. I love to see what, practice kind of comes out of the session. Like I do my best to kind of see what's arising and in a focusing way, ask that person when they're speaking on something new, oh, is there a movement that comes with that? Is there a sound? Is there an image that you can, you know, um, kind of move even further into? So it's like I like to see the practices often like sprout out of what the person like the content that is coming from that person. But yeah, I will say that to me it's like I guess bringing it back because I had mentioned that example with the sexuality and say a couple who's saying, we don't have the satisfying sex that we once had or pieces like that. I do love to do a lot of kind of offerings in the session of like having the two people connect in certain ways so that they can feel it first in the session before going home. If they're used to being maybe even one or two could be used to kind of seeing sex as a production or a performance, then it's really powerful, I think, to get back to the basics. And I had learned this from Kimberly Ann Johnson. I'd taken a workshop with her, and it was just to start with touch and just to be, just with their arms, even as the offering. It's like one person who's touching actually asks and says, I'd like to do this. And they actually say something real that they want to do. It's the idea is that it attunes the or aligns the toucher back with pleasure. So they're attuning to pleasure and saying, yeah, you know what, this would feel really good. And I think it's so healing to invite people back into these simple mindful practices because in that case where they've often gone is to these stories of oh god if this isn't working between us anymore, like do we need more people involved, should we open this wide up, should we da, da, da? It's like all this reaching outside sometimes and sometimes that's people's decision and that's a different story, but I think before there it's like can people slow it right down and recognize, oh, okay, maybe because what we've associated with routine sex, we think okay, that's the safety, so what's the other option? But it's actually that if people can maybe find a wider range of like possibilities between each other for like play and curiosity and openness, then I think it's just so cool to see that it's like it shifts something. It's like this commitment that starts to shift people toward, oh, we're on the same side and we're actually like gonna play with the body as an ally and something that want to I want to have you explore, and it can be really beautiful. And if there's stuff in the way that comes up right away, then then you look at that. But the key is that authenticity and that sharing and that honesty about what does come up. If it's a sick feeling in my stomach, can I say that? Can I say, "Oh, no, wait a second. I don't like that." But like let's pause.
What stories do you find get in the way of people viewing their body as actually an ally?
Oh, there's so much. There's so much, right? Because, first of all, it's very hard for people to often feel comfortable in their own bodies, let alone to feel sexy a lot of the time in my experience and in what people have told me over the years, they often view they might have days where they feel a little more like, yeah, can't wait to, it depends on the person, but there are people who can't wait to kind of like um show themselves off and have fun in that way. But there's a lot of people who based on, what we've been told is beauty, it's kind of like it's like people have sometimes like shame, and when they're in that place of deep shame they might look to kind of consume something else and like, oh, let's maybe we should look at porn instead of looking at each other. It's like this way that people can sometimes divert attention because they don't know how to be with where they're at. And so I think there's a lot that comes up around being in the body, and obviously there are many layers around trauma too, where yeah, a lot of things just might not feel good, and it takes time to really come to not only identify those, but be able to actually name it, to communicate, I think, with like confidence, and to have a good conversation around sex is almost like a prereq for for being sexual, but oftentimes we struggle to even get there.
Yeah. So much of actually finding the language actually requires slowing down long enough to feel the sensations. And so it is sometimes can feel like a chicken before the egg of like, know how to describe this or describe what I want, but also I haven't slowed down long enough to actually feel what that is. So then asking myself to have language for it, it can all get very complicated and nuanced
Yeah.
quickly. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
And also the other piece is like, let's say we're looking at a partnership, like who who are you in partnership with? It's like there's so many different layers to understand about a relationship. There's so much there that people often don't even know about their partner, and we just so often, like, bring our past into the current, and we kind of like make assumptions. For some people it's the kind of thing of, I was talking to a friend the other day who was saying, yeah, I really needed to learn to like tolerate more with my partner. Like I just was always trying to order him to do it exactly right, and da da da. And I'm like, oh wow, that I don't know if that's the norm, but I'm usually working on the other end. I have like a lot of clients who struggle to, yeah, again, just the message that women have often received is to be willing. We've received so much encouragement around being willing that it's, to me, it's actually kind of rare to hear that someone is over boundaried, unless it's in reaction to experiences of being under boundaried. But to me, so often, like, women are just starting to grow out of, I think, that pattern of being pleasing, and yeah, trying to meet the other before we even know what we want.
Mm. My last question for you today. What is one thing that you wish people knew about coming into connection with their body? Mm.
I think this is important because I think so often we're actually, the first thing we come into contact with in our body is maybe an overthinking, or a mind that is telling us that we're not enough and that we have to do something. So here's Mary Oliver's poem, I Worried. I worried a lot. Will the garden grow? Will the rivers flow in the right direction? Will the earth turn as it was taught? As if not, how shall I correct it? Was I right? Was I wrong? Will I be forgiven? Can I do better? Will I ever be able to sing? Even the sparrows can do it. And I am, well, hopeless. Is the eyesight fading, or am I just imagining it? Am I going to get rheumatism, lockjaw, dementia? Finally, I saw that worrying had come to nothing and gave it up. And I took my old body and I went out into the morning and sang.
Love that. I love that you brought some Mary Oliver in here too. Thank you. Um, all of the information about Angela will be below, so you'll be able to find her. You're doing one-on-one work online and in Victoria, BC, Canada.
Yeah.
You have women's circle work that you do as well. Is there any other way that people can find you? I know you had a podcast for a while. People can go back and listen.
Yeah, I had a podcast for a while on women's work, and I'm actually thinking of starting a new one talking to therapists about sex therapy. So,
I love that.
yeah, I'd love to have you on that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for all your great questions.
If you found value in this episode, it would mean so much to me for you to share the podcast with friends, a loved one, or on your social platforms. If you have the time, please rate and review the podcast so that this podcast reaches a larger audience and can inspire more and more humans to connect to their bodies too. Thank you for being here and nurturing the relationship you have with your very own